A boy and a girl, twins. My best friend had just given birth to them, and my husband was the father. I signed the divorce papers in absolute silence. When he had first brought her to his family's historic estate to break the news to his mother, rumor had it the matriarch froze in her tracks, barely glancing at the infants. She never told you, did she? I thought. Just as I capped my pen after signing the final page of the settlement, my iPhone screen lit up. A message from Julian. One single photograph. In it, he and Paige were pressed together, glowing with radiant happiness, cradling two newborns. One in baby blue, the other in soft pink. The background was the massive, sun-drenched window of a VIP birthing suite at Mount Sinai Hospital. Below the photo was a short caption, "Healthy twins, a boy and a girl. Paige and I are starting a new chapter. I hope you can move on with your life, too." I placed the phone face down on the glass desk. Spread out before me was a complete inventory of every asset registered in my name. Stocks, mutual funds, real estate, private equity shares. Every item was meticulously cataloged. I had spent several sleepless nights organizing it all. This wasn't for the division of property. This was to permanently and entirely sever all financial ties with Julian Sterling. He probably assumed that by signing the agreement drafted by his high-priced lawyer, I would simply fade away. Turning into a pathetic, discarded woman quietly stepped over for his true love, Paige. He genuinely believed this was his orchestrated victory, a fitting end for a cold, work-obsessed careerist who didn't understand emotional intimacy and couldn't even give him a child. He was dead wrong. I grabbed a printout and walked over to the massive glass whiteboard that covered an entire wall of my home office. Once, this wall had held product development charts and roadmaps for Series A funding rounds, the very ones I had drawn up to save his failing tech startup years ago. Today, it was densely covered in neon yellow and pink sticky notes. Intersecting arrows and alphanumeric codes sprawled across the glass like a complex financial mosaic, mapping out multi-million-dollar cash flows, dozens of offshore shell companies in Delaware and the Caymans, and holding accounts. This was my new battlefield, a perfect instrument of liquidation that I had crafted specifically for myself. My phone buzzed again. Incoming call. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for 3 seconds before swiping my ink-stained finger across the glass just a moment before it went to voicemail. I didn't say a word. From the other end came Julian's deliberately hushed but unmistakably smug voice, bubbling like the foam of a freshly popped bottle of Dom Perignon. "Did you see the picture?" He paused, obviously expecting me to break down or react. When I maintained my silence, he continued in a boastful tone that felt like he was trying to reach through the cell towers to slap me in the face. Paige and I had twins. A boy and a girl. The boy is 6 pounds, his sister is 5.5. Absolutely healthy. It was hard on Paige, but it was worth it. "You really should be happy for us, Claire." Holding a bright red dry erase marker in my left hand, I circled the end of a dotted line indicating a fund transfer to an LLC in the bottom right corner of the glass board, drawing a massive, bold question mark. The tip of the marker squeaked sharply against the glass. "Ah, is that so?" I replied into the void with a completely flat voice. Then I asked, "Should I send a gift according to the standards of your family's grand southern hospitality? I suppose I owe you 2 gifts now." Dead silence fell over the other end of the line. I vividly imagined the expression on Julian's face, his triumphant smirk suddenly frozen. He had called specifically to hear me crushed, to hear me scream, cry, and hysterically interrogate him. My suffering was the necessary seasoning to justify his betrayal, elevating his illicit affair with Paige to the level of a great, tragic, and victorious romance. Instead, he got nothing but my tasteless acknowledgement and a banal question about newborn gift etiquette. About 30 seconds later, he finally spoke again. The artificial tenderness had vanished, replaced by the hypocritical, patronizing pity I had grown so used to over 5 years of marriage. "Claire, please don't do this," he sighed, as if genuinely concerned for my mental state. I know it hurts. There's no point in pretending to be strong. We were married for 5 years. What happened between us isn't just my fault. You were too intense. You tried to approach everything like a corporate project, controlling every variable. Our penthouse felt like an icebox. In 5 years, I never felt an ounce of warmth. But Paige is different. She gives me a real home. A truly warm, loving home. A home. I mentally repeated the word, shifting my gaze from the cold numbers and arrows on the glass wall to the view outside. The gray horizon of the Manhattan skyline stretched up to the sky, the glass facades of midtown skyscrapers reflecting the dull leaden light. We had lived in this ultra-luxury high-rise for the entirety of our marriage, but I rarely found the time to just stand here and admire the view. I had invested the best 5 years of my life into Julian and his bankrupt tech startup, Vertex Dynamics. I had gotten my master's in financial risk management from Columbia, landing a job at a Big Four accounting firm right out of school, and working myself to the bone to become a senior manager. I met Julian when he was drowning in debt with his new venture. I used my specialized knowledge to completely rebuild his financial models, untangle his chaotic bookkeeping, and spend nights writing business plans. I sat next to him in endless meetings with Silicon Valley venture capitalists. I drank to the point of nausea with potential corporate partners to secure him his first decent round of angel investments. Later, when the company teetered on the edge of bankruptcy multiple times, I leveraged my professional network and personal savings, even going so far as to secretly take out a loan against the small upstate New York cabin left to me by my late parents to cover his fatal cash flow deficits. I thought we were comrades in arms, equal partners watching each other's backs in the corporate trenches. I never imagined that in his eyes, I was nothing but an icebox that refused to warm up. Julian's voice brought me back to reality, a home with children's laughter, with warm, home-cooked meals waiting on the table, and with a light left on for me when I come back. Not a house where I arrive at midnight only to watch you stare at risk spreadsheets and audit data. Claire, I asked my lawyer to draft the property division agreement. It'll be delivered to your office tomorrow. Don't worry, I'm not ungrateful. You were with me during the hard years and suffered a lot. I'll make sure you get what you're owed. That won't be necessary, I interrupted, my voice stripped of any inflection. The division papers are already done. They are in the vintage steel safe in your home office. The code is your birth date. I've already signed every page. Julian fell silent again. This silence lasted much longer. I could even hear his ragged, slightly accelerated breathing through the receiver. He was frantically trying to process the information. His brain was working in overdrive, trying to figure out when I had prepared the documents and how I knew the code to his personal safe. By now, his face was undoubtedly a mix of shock, humiliation, and the sudden, furious realization that his prey had voluntarily slipped out of the trap. "Since when have you been planning this?" he finally demanded, his voice suddenly dry and hoarse. "Since the first time you claimed you were pulling an all-nighter with the engineering team for a product launch," while Paige posted an Instagram photo of the city skyline from a suite at the Ritz-Carlton. I answered cleanly, and without hesitation. "Don't forget what I do for a living, Julian. I eat, sleep, and breathe risk assessment. My job is to analyze the smallest anomalous data points to predict and mitigate catastrophic financial defaults. Marriage, in a corporate sense, is simply a partnership requiring active risk management. When the risk index exceeds my maximum allowable threshold, cutting losses immediately is the only logical step." Having said that, I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call, switched my phone to silent, and tossed it face down onto the leather sofa. The complex web of financial transfers on my board seemed to shimmer before my eyes, bizarrely superimposing over the last 5 years of my married life. That marketing expansion budget he so clumsily misappropriated, it matched exactly with the first Hermes Birkin bag he gifted Paige. The constantly inflated payroll expenses in the R&D department, they covered the flights and overwater bungalows during their secret vacation in Street Barts. And those regular consulting fees transferred monthly from several anonymous shell companies undoubtedly paid the mortgage on the luxury Tribeca loft registered in Paige's name. Paige. My former college roommate. My supposedly best friend, with whom I had shared a cramped dorm room like a sister for 4 years. We rode the crowded subways together, rented a depressing, roach-infested apartment in Bushwick after graduation, and spent countless nights drinking cheap wine on the fire escape, complaining about unhinged bosses and toxic exes. Even after I landed a high-paying corporate gig, I never forgot her. I used my internal contacts to get her a decent administrative position at a respectable firm. She and Julian met at a weekend dinner party I threw to celebrate my promotion. I remember laughing that night, lightly patting Julian on the shoulder and saying, "Paige is my best friend in the world, so treat her like a queen." What a nauseating irony. I thought that when the scalpel of truth finally cut through the glamorous facade of my life, exposing the rotting, infected reality beneath, I would be paralyzed by agonizing pain, feeling my whole world crumble around me. But that didn't happen. As the evidence lined up before me one by one, the first emotion that surfaced was a cold, almost surgical professional composure. My brain kicked in like a high-speed quantitative algorithm, automatically calculating total losses, assessing current liabilities, and devising optimal mitigation strategies. Grief and rage were compressed into a tiny sealed compartment at the very bottom of my rational mind. Divorce was a swift realization of losses. Liquidating my assets was a simple return of my initial capital contribution. As for Julian and Paige, I stared at the bold red question mark on my whiteboard and allowed a cold, ironic smirk to touch the corners of my lips. Sometimes retribution doesn't require getting your hands dirty. Because exactly 1 week ago, my titular mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, made a highly unusual, rambling phone call to me that lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. During that exhausting conversation, the domineering matriarch of the old money Greenwich elite repeatedly sighed, using the evasive, passive-aggressive phrasing typical of high society to hint at a deep, suffocating anxiety keeping her awake at night. She wasn't worried about her successful CEO son, nor was she mourning the loss of her useless daughter-in-law. Her anxiety revolved entirely around Paige, the sweet, traditional, home-oriented woman Julian constantly bragged about, who was supposedly carrying the next generation of Sterling heirs. The next day, right on schedule, Julian arrived at my penthouse accompanied by his corporate lawyer, Harrison Thorne. Julian wore a brand-new, bespoke Brioni suit. Every hair was perfectly gelled, and his face red of confidence mixed with a dash of hidden defensive caution. Paige wasn't with him. It made sense. Having just given birth, she was likely lounging in an elite postpartum luxury retreat, eagerly anticipating the fruits of her victory. Inside my penthouse, every single item belonging to Julian, from his custom golf clubs and high-end audio system to his extensive collection of imported vintage watches and discarded silk pajamas, had been cataloged, securely packed, and neatly stacked by the entrance. The towering pile of heavy cardboard boxes looked like a miniature graveyard of our marriage. When Julian pushed the door open and saw the scene, his eyebrows knitted together. The calm, superior demeanor he tried so hard to project instantly cracked. "Claire, what is the meaning of all this?" His tone was sharp, his eyes bypassing the boxes to glare at me with suspicious scrutiny. "There's no need to kick me out like a stray dog. Why make this so ugly and dramatic?" I sat calmly on the living room sofa. A thin stack of legal documents was spread out on the coffee table. I completely ignored his complaint and simply nodded toward the empty armchairs opposite me. Julian and Attorney Thorne exchanged a brief glance. Thorne adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and sat down first, adopting a strictly professional, detached posture. I slid the top document across the glass table toward Julian. "This is the property division agreement. All premarital assets remain the sole property of their respective owners. I assume there are no objections on that point. Our jointly acquired property consists mainly of your 35% stake in Vertex Dynamics, 3 jointly owned real estate properties, 2 vehicles, and several diversified investment portfolios. My proposal for distribution is clearly outlined on page 2. Take a look." Julian didn't reach for it. Attorney Thorne took the packet and began scanning the pages quickly and precisely. After reading just 3 pages, the lawyer's expression changed drastically. He adjusted his glasses twice in rapid succession, shooting me a look filled with a mix of professional shock and sharp reassessment. "Mrs. Sterling," Thorne began, his voice intentionally level, though he couldn't completely hide his disbelief. "There appear to be several critical discrepancies in this proposal. Mr. Sterling's stake in Vertex is an operational business asset. According to state regulations on the appreciation of marital assets, as well as the explicit terms outlined in the addendum to your prenuptial agreement, Mr. Thorne," I interrupted smoothly, picking up a much thicker, professionally bound legal folder next to my laptop and placing it directly in front of him. "Here are the certified copies of all core financial statements for Vertex, from its inception to the current fiscal quarter, complete histories of bank transactions, and official investment subscription agreements across all 5 major funding rounds. Specifically, rounds 2 and 3 occurred when the firm's operational cash flow was completely depleted and bankruptcy was imminent. The capital injected during those crises came entirely from my personal funds, routed through my late mother's family trust." I paused, watching as Thorne's eyes widened in genuine shock, and Julian's face darkened with sudden apprehension. I continued in a calm, measured tone. "According to Section 4, Paragraph B of our prenuptial addendum, any equity acquired through independent personal capital investments during the marriage, along with 100% of its subsequent market appreciation, remains my exclusive and indivisible personal property. Furthermore, regarding the 15% stake in Vertex acquired with our joint marital funds, I am willing to concede my half to Julian at a 50% discount off the current market valuation. After all, with 2 newborns, his family expenses will increase significantly." Thorne's hands were trembling slightly. He flipped through the thick folder with desperate speed, his face growing paler with every turned page. He probably never imagined in his wildest dreams that this quiet ex-wife, who had stayed out of the corporate spotlight for the last 5 years playing the role of the supportive partner, was sitting on such a comprehensive, lethal arsenal of documentary evidence. These documents didn't just clarify equity ownership. They acted as a legal scalpel, slicing through layers to expose his client's continuous, highly questionable financial machinations. Julian's face changed color from an angry red to a sickly, ashen gray. He snatched the property division agreement right out of Thorne's hands and glared at me as if seeing who I really was for the first time. "You set me up," he hissed through clenched teeth, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage and a dawning icy terror. "You've been scheming against me this whole time, haven't you? I am simply stating verifiable financial facts and dividing our legal assets," I replied, taking a slow sip of the iced matcha sitting nearby. The chilled liquid slid down my throat, sharpening my focus even further. "Have you forgotten, Julian? That proprietary financial forecasting model that blew away Vertex's early VC investors? I spent 3 sleepless nights surviving on espresso to build it from scratch for you. When you secured that first $5 million seed round, institutional investors couldn't find a single flaw in the financial architecture." I leaned forward slightly. "And that detailed due diligence report? I pulled every string I had with former senior partners at my accounting firm to prep it. That report saved your company from at least 7 fatal contract traps. Have you forgotten that too?" "Enough," Julian roared, slamming his fist onto the glass coffee table with such force that my cup rattled in its saucer. The veins on his temples bulged as he pointed a trembling finger at me, growling in a low, furious voice. "What's the point of digging up the past? You helped me with the business? Fine, that's a fact. But what have you ever done for this family? Spreadsheets? Audit reports? Data analysis? What else are you capable of? Do you have any idea how desperately my mother wanted a grandchild over the last 5 years? You were always busy, always working, always traveling. I needed a wife, a mother who could bear me children, not a cold-blooded corporate partner." This was undoubtedly the rehearsed version he and Paige had perfected together, the shared justification they used to comfort and validate each other during countless stolen nights in hotels, convincing themselves that their betrayal was morally righteous. Saying it out loud now, he clearly believed he could seize the moral high ground and righteously condemn my failures as a traditional wife. Watching his flushed face and listening to his airtight arguments, I felt the urge to laugh, and I did let out a short, quiet chuckle. But the humor didn't touch my eyes. Children. I set my cup down, tilting my head to meet his furious, insecure gaze without flinching. Julian, we actively tried to conceive for 2 full years. We consulted 3 of the top reproductive specialists in the country and underwent every invasive medical test possible. And what was the unanimous conclusion of every chief physician? Our physiological markers were completely normal. There was absolutely no medical barrier to conception. So tell me, why did I never get pregnant? Julian's gaze darted sharply to the side. He looked away, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. That's because your psychological stress levels were too high. You're obsessed with corporate risks and financial defaults 24/7. Of course, your hormonal balance was completely wrecked. That was your personal failure. He tried to force the guilt onto me, but the aggressive conviction had drained from his voice. Right. My smirk deepened, though my voice dropped to an icy chill. Then explain to me how Paige magically managed to get pregnant by accident on her very first try with you, hitting the biological jackpot of boy-girl twins, no less. Her job as a corporate admin isn't exactly low stress, Julian. From what I recall, she's constantly on extreme diets to maintain her figure, and her lifestyle is far more chaotic and irregular than mine ever was. Why is it that when it comes to her, all the fundamental laws of reproductive medicine simply cease to apply? The words struck like poisoned needles, piercing his fragile, arrogant facade. His breath hitched, the color draining completely from his cheeks. A flash of intense panic crossed his eyes before he desperately tried to mask it behind feigned indignation. Don't be so vindictive and bitter, he countered, his neck tensing as he tried to defend her. Paige just has a naturally healthy body. She's not a high-strung corporate machine working all-nighters every week like you. His rebuttal was so flimsy and pathetic, it barely convinced the air in the room, let alone me. I see. That explains everything. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept his ridiculous medical theory, and completely changed the subject. I stood up, walked to the entryway, and grabbed the handle of a sleek silver Rimowa suitcase leaning against the wall. If there are no legal objections to the terms of the agreement, sign the document. Once you sign, you can take every single one of these boxes out of my penthouse. I paused, my hand resting on the silver handle. Oh, by the way, in the bottom compartment of the vintage safe in your home office is that Patek Philippe Celestial watch you spent 2 years trying to source. And tucked behind your cedar cigar humidor is $50,000 in cash in crisp stacks. I haven't touched either. Raising 2 infants at once will be exceptionally expensive. Consider them my modest parting gifts to your children. Julian's face rapidly changed color from crimson to chalk white. His chest heaved as he fought for air, glaring at me, ready to spit fire. But beneath the rage burned the helpless terror of a man who knew he had been entirely outplayed. Beside him, Attorney Thorne leaned in and urgently whispered something in his ear, likely advising that further stubborn resistance was legally futile, and his smartest tactical move was to sign immediately and salvage whatever he could before I unleashed something worse. Julian ground his teeth, practically tearing the Mont Blanc pen from Thorne's hand, and furiously scribbled his signature at the bottom of the property division agreement. The heavy nib of the pen actually tore through the thick parchment paper with a sharp, aggressive scratch. With the document signed, Julian looked like a rooster that had just lost a brutal cockfight. The arrogant strut he had walked in with was entirely destroyed, leaving behind only a fragile, empty shell of bravado. He looked at me with pure, undisguised malice. "Don't get cocky, Claire," he hissed, straining every word through his teeth. "You'll regret this. You'll spend the rest of your miserable life clinging to your bank accounts and audit reports, and you'll die completely alone. But me? I have Paige. I have a son and a daughter. I'm the real winner in this life. Just watch." I completely ignored his pathetic loser's sermon. I just stood there and silently watched as he, Attorney Thorne, and two assistants they called up from the lobby frantically carried the towering stacks of cardboard boxes out of my apartment. Within 10 minutes, the entryway was entirely empty. With a heavy thud, the massive oak front door slammed shut, cutting off the noise, the drama, and the suffocatingly toxic atmosphere. The penthouse plunged into total silence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city grid. The evening rush hour flowed in rivers of white and red lights along the central avenues. In the distance, corporate neon signs began to blink on, illuminating the cold, majestic New York skyline. The real winner in this life. Julian, your definition of winning is so superficial and pathetic, it's almost funny. You don't have the slightest clue about the Category 5 hurricane that is currently barreling straight toward your life. I returned to the sofa and picked up my iPhone. The hospital photo Julian had sent me was still on the screen. A happy little family of 3. I swiped away the thread, opened my contacts, and scrolled down until I found the number saved under the name. Eleanor Sterling, mother-in-law. I had barely used this number since my relationship with Julian started souring over his demands for a traditional housewife. Our last substantial contact was that bizarre 2-hour and 17-minute marathon call 7 days ago. I opened a new message template and typed out a single, precise sentence. Julian and Paige recently welcomed boy-girl twins. He is overjoyed and mentioned he plans to bring the babies to the Greenwich estate next weekend to throw a massive celebration. Just wanted to share the joyous news with you, Eleanor. My finger hovered over the send icon for a fraction of a second before I decisively pressed it. A soft chime confirmed the message was delivered. Without the slightest hesitation, I immediately opened Julian and Paige's profiles and permanently blocked them on all cellular and social platforms. I completely scrubbed their records from my phone. Finishing my digital house cleaning, I tossed the phone onto the sofa and returned to my glass board. Among the dense network of financial flows and red question marks, one specific node stood out. I took a blue marker and uncapped it. Right next to a massive red question mark, I slowly wrote 2 words. Game on. That was merely the overture. The real show was just beginning. Julian moved even faster than I anticipated. Just 3 days after our divorce was finalized by a judge, I stumbled upon his latest public post while scrolling Instagram from a burner account. It was a carousel of 9 professional photographs, accompanied by a sickeningly sentimental caption, "Now 1 + 1 = 4. Grateful for everything in my life. Looking forward to our bright future." In the photos, Paige was dressed in a plush designer loungewear set, her hair pulled up into a messy bun, her face artfully devoid of heavy makeup. As she cradled the 2 infants in her arms, she looked into the camera with a gaze so steeped in maternal tenderness, it looked like a staged spread for a parenting magazine. Julian stood behind her, his arms securely wrapped around her shoulders, his chin resting softly on the top of her head. His face radiated the unmistakable glow of arrogant pride and patriarchal fulfillment. The setting was the living room of their new luxury home, decorated in soft, warm tones I had never seen before, overflowing with expensive baby swings, organic plush toys, and golden sunlight pouring onto the hardwood floors. It looked like the ultimate picture of domestic bliss. The comments section under the post exploded into a massive virtual celebration among our professional and social circles. "Julian, you are crushing it. Thriving business and a beautiful family. The true definition of a winner. Your wife is stunning and the babies are angels. Congratulations. Boy? Girl twins? That's the ultimate biological jackpot, Julian. Your family is truly blessed. 2 at once. A boy and a girl. You must have done something right in a past life, man. Congrats." Several of our mutual corporate acquaintances and college friends also left flattering congratulatory comments. Reading between the lines, I could easily detect their hidden awkwardness and careful diplomacy. Everyone knew I had just divorced him, but they were rushing to bow to the new queen. Julian replied to almost every comment with vigorous enthusiasm. His tone was a nauseating cocktail of false modesty and pure vanity. He was acting like a king, a conqueror who had just established a new dynasty and couldn't wait to show off the crown jewels to the world. He felt entitled to be arrogant. In 5 years of marriage to me, he had failed to produce a single heir. But within a year of starting his affair with Paige, he not only got a child, but he hit the traditional family jackpot, a healthy son and a daughter. For a man saturated to the bone in old-fashioned patriarchal values, a man who valued family lineage, legacy, and social standing above life itself, and for his aristocratic family who shared those exact same obsessions, this was the ultimate badge of honor. It was a glorious achievement that instantly washed away the moral sin of his infidelity and divorce. I calmly swiped through the photos and the endless stream of congratulations, closed the app, and booted up my encrypted laptop. I logged into a secure email server with two-factor authentication. A new message was waiting in my inbox. The sender's address was a random string of alphanumeric characters, but I knew exactly who was on the other end. I opened the message. The body of the email was completely blank. Attached to it was one encrypted zip file and a separate text document. The text file contained only an address. I downloaded the zip file, entered a complex 16-character decryption key, and extracted the contents. Inside were 14 high-resolution digital photographs. The shots featured a young man in a dark gray hoodie, his face partially obscured by a black baseball cap and a surgical mask. He was hastily entering the sliding doors of a private fertility clinic on various days and times. Despite his aggressive attempts to hide his identity, I instantly recognized him by his characteristic slouching gait and a tiny, discolored birthmark just below his left ear. It was Dylan Sterling, Julian's cousin, 2 years his junior. Dylan held a fictitious executive position at Vertex Dynamics, pulling a solid 6-figure salary while spending his days slacking off, playing online poker, and partying in the VIP booths of nightclubs. His primary life skills consisted of accumulating mountains of debt and wrecking expensive sports cars. And the clinic in the photos bore an imposing, highly scientific name on its brass plaque: Genesis Fertility Institute. It was the exact same elite medical facility Eleanor had mentioned during our marathon phone conversation, the place she had anxiously escorted Paige to for a routine prenatal checkup because Paige complained of feeling unwell. I opened the text document and typed the address into my mapping software. The location pinpointed a rundown, 10-year-old apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of Newark, New Jersey, right next to a major freight distribution hub. The area was sketchy. The rent was dirt cheap. And it was exactly a 40-minute drive from the Genesis Fertility Institute. From family gossip, I knew Dylan rented a cheap studio there as a personal hideout when he wanted to lay low or entertain questionable company away from the prying eyes of his family. I downloaded all the documentation, saved it onto a secure, hardware-encrypted external flash drive, and typed a 2-word reply to the anonymous sender. Payment transferred. Completing the transaction, I walked into the kitchen and brewed a cup of loose-leaf green tea. The fresh, slightly earthy aroma filled the quiet penthouse. Holding the warm, ceramic mug, I stepped out onto my private terrace. The night air was cool against my skin, and the lights of Manhattan below twinkled like an endless ocean of diamonds. All variables were moving precisely according to my projections. Having wrapped up that digital errand, I focused entirely on finalizing the corporate liquidation of the 15% stake in Vertex that I had stripped from Julian in the divorce. Julian's lawyer, Harrison Thorne, proved exceptionally efficient when it came to clean corporate finances. By the next day, a massive 7-figure wire transfer successfully cleared and settled into my dedicated private bank account. Looking at the notification on my mobile banking app, my pulse didn't skip a single beat. That capital had originally belonged to me. It was the hard-earned income of 5 years of my professional youth, countless sleepless nights of labor, and the liquidated value of my late parents' estate. It had simply returned to its rightful owner, and very soon, it would be deployed toward a much larger, final objective. Over the next few days, My life ran with the disciplined precision of a Swiss chronometer. I woke up at exactly 7 a.m., completed an intensive 1-hour workout, and sat down at my desk to execute risk consulting contracts for several independent corporate clients. My afternoons were spent in high-level meetings with my personal legal team and private wealth managers, systematically restructuring my total liquid assets and transferring the entire portfolio into an offshore family trust structure. It was critical that my capital and my future were completely shielded from my marital past. During that week, several former friends and colleagues called my personal number. Their tones were universally cautious. They tried to fish for details about the sudden divorce. I gave every single one of them the same standardized corporate response. We parted amicably due to irreconcilable differences in our long-term life goals. Only one caller, a female executive who had attended college with me and Paige, finally lost her composure after a few minutes of polite hesitation. She dropped her voice to an angry whisper. "Claire, are you really going to let them treat you like this? What Paige did is absolutely unforgivable. She's been like this since the dorm's sweet and innocent on the outside, but a calculating viper on the inside, willing to do whatever it takes to snatch up whatever catches her eye, especially if it belongs to someone else. I never dreamed she'd stoop so low as to steal her best friend's husband." I interrupted her smoothly, my voice completely devoid of emotional resonance. "Julian and I separated because our marriage failed. Whatever choices he makes after that are his personal business." My friend sighed in frustration. "You don't understand, Claire. Julian is telling everyone in our circle a completely different story. He completely absolutely impossible to live with, cold, controlling, and emotionally barren, and that he had no choice but to leave for his own mental sanity. And Paige, she's even worse. She's playing the role of the great martyr in her mommy groups, crying crocodile tears and claiming you voluntarily stepped aside because you felt guilty for not giving him children, allowing their true love to blossom. She's telling everyone how sorry she feels for you. It makes me sick. Those two shameless sociopaths deserve each other." "Oh, really?" I arched an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of my tea. "Is that the official narrative they're pushing?" "Yes. They've painted themselves as tragic romantic heroes who overcame massive obstacles to build a family. And here's the other thing I heard from a mutual friend up in Connecticut. Julian is throwing a massive, lavish sip-and-see christening party to present the babies at the Sterling family estate next weekend. He's inviting all the major socialites, politicians, and the region's business elite to officially introduce Paige and the twins. He wants to cement his public image as the perfect family man and CEO." "I see." I set my cup down on the desk, a cold, joyless smile forming on my lips. "I'm sure it will be a truly magnificent celebration." Ending the call, I walked over to my desk and opened my leather planner. The date of the following weekend was already circled twice in bright red ink. Julian's hometown was a historic elite enclave in Greenwich, Connecticut, nestled among pine forests and winding roads. A place where traditional etiquette, family pedigree, and public reputation were valued above the law. In a place like that, high society gossip spread faster than fiber optic internet, and a public scandal could permanently obliterate a family's reputation for generations. If a prominent family suffered even a minor humiliation, the entire county knew about it by noon, and it remained the main topic of conversation at the country clubs for the next 30 years. "Julian, the grander you build your stage, and the more high-profile spectators you invite to the theater, the more catastrophic the bodily trauma will be when you are pushed off the platform." I picked up my phone and dialed a specific number. It rang 6 times before clicking over. A warm female voice, tinged with fatigue but undeniable genuine affection, came through the receiver. "Hello. Who is this?" "Aunt Martha." "It's me, Claire," I said softly, letting my tone relax into something familiarly warm. "Claire, sweetheart." "My goodness," Aunt Martha exclaimed delightedly, her voice jumping 3 octaves, instantly filled with pleasant surprise. "What a wonderful surprise. Why are you calling your old aunt? How are you doing? You're not working yourself to death in that big city, are you?" Are you eating properly? I'm doing perfectly fine, Aunt Martha. How are you and Uncle Edgar? Oh, we're fine, darling. Perfectly fine. Though your uncle's gout is acting up again with all this damp weather? After a few minutes of pleasant family chatter, I steered the conversation toward my primary objective. Aunt Martha, will you be in town next weekend? I have some personal business to attend to in Connecticut, and I was planning to come up for a couple of days. Next weekend? Well, of course, sweetheart. If my little Claire is coming to visit, I'll completely clear my social calendar, Martha replied instantly, though her tone quickly shifted to maternal concern. Is everything all right, darling? Did you and Julian have a falling out? Just the other day at a charity luncheon, I bumped into Mrs. Caldwell, and she said she saw Julian's mother, Eleanor, looking like she'd seen a ghost, sighing and wringing her hands like it was the end of the world. But whenever people asked her what was wrong, she clammed up tight. Aunt Martha worked as the senior administrative clerk at the county courthouse. While not a corporate executive, her position put her at the absolute epicenter of local municipal gossip. She knew everyone, heard everything, possessed an unshakable moral compass, and absolutely despised high society hypocrisy. I just need to sort out a few legal and financial matters in person. I'll explain everything over dinner when I arrive, I said smoothly. And Aunt Martha, please keep my visit completely confidential. Don't mention it to anyone at the club, especially no one connected to the Sterling family. The line went silent for 2 beats. Possessing decades of experience navigating petty local politics, Aunt Martha immediately sensed the hidden gravity in my request. Her tone turned serious and reliable. Understood, sweetheart. Don't worry about a thing. Just send me your flight details and I'll pick you up at the airport myself. No need to drive to the airport, Aunt Martha. I'll rent a car and drive up. I'll call you as soon as I check into my hotel. All right, darling. Drive safely, you hear? Hanging up with Aunt Martha, I felt as though I had locked the final tumbler on a vault. The afternoon before the grand presentation of the babies at the Sterling family estate, I drove an elegant, inconspicuous rental car into the picturesque, lush green Connecticut enclave where Julian grew up. The town was framed by slow-moving rivers, its historic cobblestone streets polished to a shine by centuries of carriage wheels and luxury sedans. Antique mansions with sprawling verandas and pristine white columns lined the avenues, and the crisp air was thick with the scent of pine and blooming lilac. Time here seemed to flow with a deliberate, aristocratic sluggishness. Without alerting a soul, I checked into a newly built boutique hotel on the eastern edge of the historic district, booking a corner suite on the top floor, using my corporate ID. My room was on the 8th floor. Pulling back the sheer curtains, I had an unobstructed bird's-eye view of the sprawling Sterling estate just 3 blocks away. The manicured front lawn of the estate had already been transformed into an extravagant event venue. A massive cream-colored tent had been erected on the grass, decorated with elaborate floral arches, gold chandeliers, and hundreds of pastel blue and pink balloons. A massive silk banner stretched across the second-floor balcony of the main house, adorned with glittering gold calligraphy. In celebration of the christening and presentation of the Sterling heirs boy and girl twins, the Sterlings were old Connecticut aristocracy. Julian's father, Arthur, was a retired federal judge who commanded immense respect in local circles, and Julian was considered the most successful jewel of his generation, a brilliant Manhattan CEO whom local society matrons constantly held up as an example to their less successful sons. This baby presentation wasn't just a party for 2 infants. It was a loud, triumphant declaration to the entire region that the Sterling dynasty had secured its bloodline, its wealth, and its future. I drew the heavy blackout curtains closed, opened my laptop, and connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot. I began a comprehensive final check of the digital payload I had prepared for tomorrow's festivities. It was a standard high-speed black USB drive containing a meticulously compiled forensic-level investigation report produced by a top-tier private intelligence firm over the last 3 weeks. First, high-resolution surveillance photos confirming Dylan Sterling had visited the Genesis Fertility Institute 7 times over the past year, complete with vehicle tracking logs and time-stamped entry records. Second, a comprehensive summary of telecommunications metadata, detailing extensive late-night cellular communications between Paige and Dylan over the 12 months leading up to the pregnancy. Though there were no audio recordings, the frequency and timing of the calls aligned perfectly with Paige's initial fertility consultations and subsequent ovulation cycles. Third, a detailed investigation into the Genesis Fertility Institute itself. While it operated as a fully licensed medical facility on paper, the institute quietly catered to ultra-wealthy clients seeking specialized, off-the-books reproductive services. The report documented a private donor concierge service that allowed clients to secretly select specific biological samples from family members or acquaintances to bypass red flags in genetic screening. Dylan Sterling was officially registered in their database as an active, verified donor under the clinical profile ID, Donor XM. Finally, an authoritative medical analytical assessment compiled by a board-certified reproductive endocrinologist. Using the sparse, casual lifestyle photos and fitness tracker data Julian had proudly posted of Paige online over the years, combined with her documented clinical history, the report calculated the statistical probability of Paige naturally conceiving boy-girl twins at less than 0.1%. Conversely, the probability of achieving that exact biological outcome through targeted in vitro fertilization, IVF, using pre-selected embryos, was estimated at over 88%. All the disparate data points connected flawlessly, forming an airtight forensic masterpiece. Paige had never conceived naturally with Julian. She had utilized the Genesis Fertility Institute to undergo an IVF cycle using third-party donor sperm and possibly donor eggs, given her own dietary restrictions and medical profile. The biological father of those twins was none other than Julian's deadbeat cousin, Dylan. She had orchestrated an elaborate, melodramatic biological fraud, successfully deceiving Julian, his aristocratic parents, and all of high society. Her rationale for choosing Dylan was coldly pragmatic and likely rested on 3 pillars. First, as a weak-willed, financially dependent family member, Dylan was easy to manipulate and control through bribery or blackmail. Second, by using a direct blood relative of the Sterlings, any future routine genetic tests or physical family resemblances would easily pass superficial scrutiny without raising alarm. Third, Dylan was broke and desperate for cash, making his silence cheap. It was an exceptionally calculated, ruthless scheme. However, Paige made 2 fatal miscalculations in her risk assessment model. First, she failed to account for the terrifying, volcanic wrath of an old money matriarch who valued family honor, genealogical lineage, and social prestige above life itself. She never imagined what Eleanor Sterling would do when confronted with the reality that her glorious grandchildren were the product of a cheap medical scam involving the family's most disgraceful relative. Second, she completely underestimated me. She assumed that because I was a professional woman who valued logic over melodrama, I would simply process the emotional trauma of the affair, sign whatever papers were pushed in front of me, and quietly fade into the corporate background like a defeated victim. She forgot or simply lacked the intellectual capacity to understand that the greatest professional asset of a senior corporate risk auditor is the ability to detect anomalous data patterns beneath a calm surface, systematically gather evidence, and deliver a lethal, precision strike exactly when the target is most vulnerable. I never enter a boardroom or a battlefield without a complete exit strategy. As the evening shadows lengthened over the historic town, I changed into an inconspicuous dark gray tracksuit, pulled a black baseball cap low over my eyes, securely tucked my long hair under the brim, and slipped out of the hotel through a side exit. I seamlessly blended into the warm, bustling evening flow of pedestrians along the historic waterfront. I entered a classic, wood-paneled local tavern popular with the old-timers, slid into a dimly lit corner booth, and ordered a simple club sandwich and an iced tea. The tavern was packed and lively, and at almost every table around me, excited conversations buzzed about tomorrow's grand celebration at the Sterling estate. Can you believe it? Old Judge Sterling's boy, the hotshot CEO from Manhattan, is throwing the biggest christening party this town has seen since the governor's inauguration. Boy and girl twins. Now that's what I call securing the family legacy. Well said. Julian was always the smartest kid in our graduating class, and now he's running a multi-million-dollar tech firm. And his new wife? Beautiful girl, super sweet, and blessed them with an heir and a spare on the first try. That family lives under a lucky star, I swear. Hey, whatever happened to his first wife? Didn't he marry some corporate finance ice queen from upstate a few years back? Her. I heard from Eleanor's bridge club friends that the first wife was an absolute nightmare. A cold-blooded workaholic who cared more about her laptop than making a home. They were married for 5 years and she couldn't even give him a kid. Do you really think an old family like the Sterlings would put up with a barren corporate iceberg forever? Julian dumped her right on time and upgraded. This new girl really knows how to take care of a man and build a real family. I kept my head down, methodically eating my sandwich in silence. Envy, disdain, ignorant small-town speculation. Every venomous syllable drifted clearly into my booth. It was obvious that Julian and Paige had successfully leveraged his parents' social standing to completely dominate the local narrative. The entire county was currently convinced that I was a cold, barren failure rightfully discarded by the town's golden boy, while Paige was elevated as the fertile, loving savior of the Sterling dynasty. Perfect. In financial risk management, the higher a fraudulent asset is artificially inflated, the more catastrophic and absolute the market correction will be when the bubble finally bursts. Public opinion is a double-edged sword. When it swings the other way, it cuts deeper than any court injunction. I paid in cash, pulled the brim of my cap lower, and slipped out of the tavern into the crisp Connecticut night. By the time I returned to my hotel room, the town had settled into quiet darkness. Outside my window, the Sterling estate was still ablaze with floodlights. The faint sounds of clinking glass and sound system checks drifted through the night air as catering crews finalized preparations for tomorrow's massive event. The entire Sterling household was undoubtedly drowning in a manic, intoxicating cocktail of pride, vanity, and anticipation. Julian and Paige were probably lying in bed right now, dreaming of how they would bask in the adoration of the county's elite tomorrow morning, officially cementing their status as the ultimate corporate and family power couple. They had no idea that the magnificent high society stage they had been building for months would, in less than 12 hours, turn into the epicenter of the most humiliating scandal in the region's modern history. I sat at my desk, booted up my laptop, and accessed the encrypted zip file containing the Genesis Fertility Institute records, the forensic donor reports, the surveillance photos, and the medical probability analysis. Using an anonymous, securely routed Tor email address, I forwarded the entire digital payload directly to Aunt Martha's personal inbox. In the body of the text, I included only one simple instruction. From an anonymous source who cares deeply about the integrity of the Sterling family legacy, please ensure that Mrs. Eleanor Sterling reviews these documents in private before the reception begins tomorrow morning. Aunt Martha had worked in the municipal court system for 30 years. She was universally respected for her ironclad integrity, sharp wit, and absolute intolerance for moral hypocrisy. More importantly, decades ago, she and Eleanor Sterling had been close social acquaintances before petty local politics caused a cooling off. Despite the distance, a baseline of mutual respect remained. She was the absolute perfect delivery mechanism for this asset. Given Eleanor's fanatical obsession with her family's genealogical line and high society reputation, reviewing these documents would trigger an immediate, volcanic psychological reaction. Her aristocratic pride would override any social etiquette, compelling her to act with ruthless, destructive decisiveness to root the deception out of her home. And that was exactly the catalyst I needed. The most efficient demolitions occur when the property owner voluntarily detonates the charges from inside the building. Satisfied that the email had been successfully transmitted and decrypted on the receiving server, I shut down my laptop and turned off the desk lamp. The room was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint, flickering glow of the floodlights bouncing off the Sterling estate 3 blocks away, casting long, shadowy silhouettes across my ceiling. I lay back on the crisp hotel linens and closed my eyes. Outside, the steady chirping of crickets blended with the distant hum of traffic, creating the unique, heavy silence of a summer night. tomorrow promised to be exceptionally productive. The next morning dawned bright and sunny. The sky was a cloudless, vibrant blue, and golden sunlight poured generously over the sprawling grounds of the Sterling estate, illuminating the manicured lawns with striking clarity. The massive cream tent, the shimmering gold banners, the towering pastel balloon arches, every detail looked aggressively expensive and vibrant. By 10 a.m., the driveways leading to the estate were completely jammed with luxury sedans, imported SUVs, and black town cars. The cream of local high society had arrived. Retired federal judges, wealthy real estate developers, local politicians, bank presidents, and prominent socialites all mingled on the lawn with flutes of champagne in hand. Julian looked like he had stepped straight out of the pages of GQ. He wore an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, his hair styled to absolute perfection as he stood by the grand entrance, receiving guests. His face practically glowed with an intoxicating mix of supreme confidence, corporate pride, and arrogant satisfaction. Beside him stood his father, retired Judge Sterling, immaculately dressed in an elegant light linen suit. Though the judge had recently suffered from mild health issues, making him look a bit pale, his posture was ramrod straight with pride. As he greeted old colleagues, his eyes shone with the deep satisfaction of a patriarch whose family name was secure. I didn't attend the reception. Instead, I settled comfortably into a leather armchair in my 8th-floor hotel room, sipping fresh coffee and looking through powerful, military-grade stabilized binoculars straight into the main pavilion. At the same time, my iPad sat on the table, streaming crystal-clear, high-definition video. Aunt Martha had played her role flawlessly. Claiming she wanted to help with the morning preparations, she had arrived at the estate early and quietly propped up her secondary smartphone on a floral stand near the VIP seating, camouflaging it behind a decorative arrangement of white hydrangeas. The camera angle provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the main stage and the front guest tables. On my screen, the reception was a whirlwind of high society chatter and clinking silver. Paige sat in the center of the VIP pavilion, completely surrounded by a fawning circle of wealthy society matrons. Today, she was dressed to the nines in a custom, soft pink Chanel boucle dress that complemented her delicate features. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, secured with a pearl hairpin. Resting in her arms were the infant twins, both dressed in matching hand-embroidered white silk christening gowns. She kept her head slightly tilted, projecting the perfect image of demure maternal tenderness, soaking up the endless stream of flattery and admiration from the surrounding women. But beneath the modest mask, undisguised triumphant vanity flared in her eyes. The entire Sterling family seemed to be floating on an expanding cloud of absolute social triumph. My gaze, however, swept past the happy couple and focused exclusively on another figure sitting at the main family table: Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor was dressed in the formal attire of the estate's hostess, a royal blue velvet suit with a silk scarf elegantly draped over her shoulders. Her hair was styled in a stiff, immaculately lacquered salon updo. To a casual observer mingling in the crowd on the lawn, she looked like any other proud grandmother hosting a lavish high society reception. But through the optical zoom of my binoculars, I saw the truth. Eleanor's facial muscles were locked in a state of rigid, unnatural tension. Her polite, conversational smiles were completely frozen. Her eyes were dead and glassy. Every few seconds, her gaze would dart away from the guests and stare into the void with an expression of pure, icy devastation. Her movements were jerky and erratic. When a waiter poured tea into her bone china cup, her hand trembled so violently she nearly spilled boiling water onto the pristine white linen tablecloth. A digital notification popped up on my iPad screen, a text from Aunt Martha. She saw the file. Oh, honey, she saw it all right. She showed up at my doorstep at exactly 6 a.m. Her eyes were bloodshot like she hadn't slept a wink. I handed her the printed portfolio. She sat on the sofa in my living room and read every single page, word for word, for a whole hour. Didn't say a word. Her knuckles turned white from how hard she was gripping the paper. When she stood up to leave, her whole body was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I tried to grab her arm to steady her, but she just pulled away, gave me an ice-cold look, and said, "I understand everything. I typed a single character reply, K. On the live video feed, the hired MC, a well-known local television anchor, stepped onto the stage and tapped the microphone to get the guests' attention. With smooth, professional charisma, he began whipping the crowd into an enthusiastic, celebratory mood. His opening remarks were a masterclass in society flattery. He heaped praise on the illustrious Sterling legal dynasty, extolled Julian's meteoric rise as a Manhattan tech titan, complimented Paige's beauty and grace, and poetically described the infant twins as a miraculous blessing sent down from the heavens themselves. The manicured lawn erupted into polite, synchronized applause. When the introductory speeches concluded, the MC dramatically raised his voice. And now, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, I ask for your attention to the center stage, where we welcome the stars of today's celebration, the proud parents and their beautiful new heirs. Let's give them a warm, welcoming round of applause. The background music swelled into an uplifting, triumphant classical melody. Julian straightened up, buttoned his suit jacket, and led the way up the red-carpeted stairs to the stage. He turned to Paige, tenderly took the baby boy from her arms, and proudly held the infant to his chest. With his free hand, he gently wrapped an arm around Paige's waist. Paige, holding the baby girl, flashed the crowd a bashful, radiant smile and rested her head against Julian's shoulder. As the family of four reached the center of the stage, the applause crescendoed into a thunderous ovation, accompanied by enthusiastic cheers from Julian's old college buddies. Julian cradled his son, looking out over the sea of the county's elite. His face was lit by a blinding smile, an absolute, unfiltered expression of supreme arrogance and victory. He cleared his throat directly into the microphone. His deep voice echoed across the estate grounds, heavy with restrained emotion. "Thank you. Thank you all so much," he began, pausing to let the applause die down. "To all our friends, family, and esteemed colleagues who traveled from near and far to celebrate the christening and official presentation of my son, Alexander Arthur Sterling, and my daughter, Caroline Eleanor Sterling, I am deeply moved by your presence here today." He took a theatrical breath, his chest expanding. "Standing here today, looking out at all of you, I don't feel the pressure of business or expectations on my shoulders. It's an overwhelming weight of pure gratitude and family duty. Because today, I can finally stand before you and say, the legacy of the Sterling family is secure." The crowd erupted again. Several elderly gentlemen raised their champagne flutes in a formal toast. In the front row, two of Julian's childhood friends were even wiping away tears of emotion. Julian waited for the noise to subside before moving to the next phase of his speech. He turned slightly, looking at Paige with an expression of intense, theatrical devotion. His voice dropped an octave into a soft, intimate register. "More than anything else in the world, I want to express my eternal gratitude to my incredible wife, Paige." He paused, letting the silence build for emotional effect. "She gave me what I had been searching for my entire life. She gave me a real, loving home. She taught me the true meaning of warmth, partnership, and family sacrifice. Her grace, her resilience, and her unwavering love supported me through my darkest professional hours. And now, she has gifted me the greatest miracle of all these two perfect, beautiful children. Paige, thank you from the bottom of my heart." Right on cue, Paige modestly lowered her eyes. A delicate blush crept up her cheeks as she executed a masterful portrayal of emotional gratitude and wifely devotion. A collective sigh of admiration rippled through the guests in the front rows. Julian turned back to his parents' VIP table, puffing out his chest. "And finally, I want to thank my mother and father. Thank you for decades of love, for your moral guidance, and for your unwavering belief in me. In particular, I want to thank my mother, who sacrificed so much of her life and energy to preserve this family, and who has showered Paige and these children with boundless love and support." His speech was a carefully calculated rhetorical masterpiece, designed to stroke every ego, check every social box, and permanently cement his image as the humble, grateful, successful corporate patriarch who had it all. Almost everyone in the audience was deeply moved. Several elderly matrons were nodding vigorously in approval, whispering to their neighbors about what a fine, upstanding man Julian had become. Julian was hitting his stride. His delivery was becoming more fluid and passionate. He was acting as if he was already picturing his next major corporate IPO or a future political campaign. It was at that exact moment, without a single word of warning, that Eleanor Sterling stood up from her seat at the VIP table. Her movement was so sharp and sudden that her heavy mahogany dining chair scraped backward across the brick patio with a harsh, grating screech, a sound that sliced cleanly through Julian's amplified voice. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the middle of a formal toast, it sounded like a gunshot. The tables immediately surrounding the family pavilion fell silent. Guests turned their heads in confusion. The professional MC on stage instantly sensed the awkward breach in etiquette and tried to smooth it over with the slick reflexes of an event planner. He stepped toward the edge of the stage, flashing a brilliant, camera-ready smile. "Well, it looks like our proud grandmother simply can't wait another second to come up here and share her blessing with the new heirs." Before the MC could finish his polished transition, Eleanor turned her head and fixed him with a stare so icy, so piercing, and so terrifyingly hollow that the words literally died in his throat. The professional smile melted off his face. He instinctively clamped his mouth shut and took 2 quick steps backward, retreating into the shadows of the stage. Julian's speech cut off completely. He lowered the microphone, blinking and staring at his mother in confusion and growing irritation. His eyebrows knitted together, his eyes flashing a clear, annoyed warning not to ruin his perfect moment. "Mother," he said into the microphone, his tone tight with forced politeness. "Are you all right? Have a seat for another minute. We're almost done with the presentation." Eleanor completely ignored him. She stepped away from the table and began walking toward the stage. Her steps were slow, measured, and unnaturally rigid. Her expensive designer heels struck the wooden steps of the pavilion with a heavy, rhythmic thud. 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 A sound that felt like a hammer striking the chest of everyone watching. She reached the center of the stage and stopped directly in front of Julian. For several agonizing seconds, she simply stared into his eyes. Her expression was an unreadable, terrifying storm of grief, rage, and aristocratic humiliation, a storm that rapidly crystallized into absolute icy resolve. Then, she lowered her gaze. Her eyes locked onto the infant boy wrapped in blue silk, who was squirming and blinking up at the bright chandeliers from Julian's arms. Julian instinctively gripped the baby tighter, leaning back slightly as a wave of defensive unease washed over him. "Mother, do you want to hold Alexander?" "Just wait until the end of the toast. We're in the middle of—" Without uttering a word, Eleanor reached out. Her hands were stiff and surprisingly aggressive as she grabbed the swaddled infant and forcefully tore him from Julian's arms. Julian was caught entirely off guard. His arms were suddenly empty, hovering helplessly in the air, and his face flushed with embarrassment and shock. "Mother, careful. What are you doing?" Eleanor acted as if he didn't exist. Holding the infant tightly with both hands, she raised him to eye level. She didn't blink. Her gaze swept over the child's features like an optical scanner, studying the slope of the forehead, the shape of the eyebrows, the bridge of the nose, the curve of the jaw. With agonizing, prolonged slowness, she scrutinized every millimeter of the baby's face. The silence stretched to its breaking point. Across the entire 2-acre estate, the festive music mysteriously cut off. The only remaining sound was the rustle of the wind in the weeping willows and the nervous shuffling of 300 high society guests holding their breath, watching the bizarre family drama unfold. Paige froze a few steps away, clutching the baby girl to her chest. The rehearsed, radiant smile completely evaporated from her face, replaced by a creeping, paralyzed terror. Her lips parted slightly as she tried to form words, but her vocal cords refused to obey. Instinctively, she took a slow step backward, squeezing the infant so tightly that the child began to squirm. Julian's face darkened from annoyance to genuine alarm. He looked at his mother, then at Paige, and finally back at the baby boy his mother was inspecting. A faint, terrifying ringing began to echo in the back of his head. Eleanor stared at the child for 30 full seconds. Finally, very slowly, she turned her head. Her gaze swept over like a sniper's crosshairs and locked onto Paige's pale, bloodless face. Eleanor's lower lip began to tremble violently. It wasn't the trembling of an old woman about to cry. It was the physical manifestation of a volcanic, destructive rage reaching critical mass. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud. It was hoarse, dry, and low. But because of the dead silence gripping the estate, and because she was standing right next to the microphone on the podium, every word sliced through the air like a razor blade, broadcasting clearly across the entire property. Miss Paige. She addressed her daughter-in-law by her first name with a chilling, formal detachment, stripping away any familial intimacy. Paige's entire body jerked as if she had been electrocuted. In her arms, the baby girl, startled by the sudden tension, let out a sharp, wailing cry. That high-pitched infant scream echoed across the quiet lawn like a siren, instantly making the atmosphere suffocating. Eleanor acted as if she hadn't heard the crying baby at all. She kept her dead, burning eyes fixed on Paige, stepping closer and enunciating every syllable with absolute, blood-curdling clarity. "Tell me," Eleanor demanded, slightly thrusting the swaddled infant forward. Her voice suddenly spiked into a harsh, hysterical shriek that bounced off the white columns of the main house. "Whose bastard seed is this?" Boom. A collective gasp from the audience was audible. "Mother, have you lost your mind?" Julian panicked. The blood drained from his face as he lunged forward, grabbing his mother's arm in a desperate attempt to silence her. His voice cracked with sheer terror and fury. "What kind of insane nonsense are you spewing? It's their christening. You're having a nervous breakdown." Eleanor didn't even look at him. With a sharp, aggressive jerk of her shoulder, she tore out of his grasp, keeping her blazing eyes fixed exclusively on Paige. The aristocratic composure she had maintained for decades entirely vanished, replaced by the feral rage of a queen whose throne had been defiled by common thieves. "I've lost my mind?" Eleanor let out a short, horrifying laugh that sent shivers down the spines of the guests in the front row. "If I had truly lost my mind, Julian Sterling, I wouldn't have kept quiet all morning just to stand here and ask this manipulative little tramp to her face in front of the entire county." She raised a trembling right hand and pointed a rigid finger right between Paige's eyes. Her entire arm shook with rage. "Answer me!" Eleanor screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing over the manicured lawns. "Look me in the eyes and tell this entire town exactly what medical procedures you underwent at the Genesis Fertility Institute. Who is the biological father of the children in those blankets?" Paige's face went the color of ash. Her arms locked around the crying baby girl. Her knees buckled slightly, and her lips trembled uncontrollably. "Eleanor, Mrs. Sterling, please, you're scaring the babies. Let's go inside and talk about this. Please, don't do this here. Shut your mouth." Eleanor barked with such ferocious authority that the professional MC standing in the shadows dropped his clipboard onto the stage with a loud clatter. With her free hand, Eleanor reached into her designer leather handbag, pulled out a thick brown envelope, and with all her physical strength, slammed it onto the acrylic podium. "You parade around this town every day, bragging about your miraculous boy-girl twins. You act like you're some blessed fertility goddess who saved the Sterling bloodline." Eleanor's chest heaved, her voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered hatred. "Did you think Julian was the only one you could wrap around your little finger?" She snatched the envelope, ripped the top off, and pulled out a thick stack of printed forensic documents and 8x10 surveillance photos, waving them furiously in Paige's face. "There isn't a single drop of Julian's blood in these two infants. These are not his children." The entire 300-seat guest pavilion erupted into absolute chaos. Society matrons gasped in horror. Several dropped their crystal champagne flutes onto the brick patio, where they shattered into pieces. In the VIP section, Judge Sterling tried to stand up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson, before collapsing back into his chair, clutching his chest as two retired doctors rushed to his aid. "What the hell are you talking about?" Julian's eyes were wide and bloodshot, his voice dropping to a panicked, feral growl. He grabbed his mother's shoulder again, shaking her. "Mother, stop this immediately. You are destroying our family's name. Stop lying." "I am lying?" Eleanor turned on her son like a rabid animal, her voice reaching a deafening crescendo. "If I were lying, would I stand here and destroy my own family crest in front of everyone I've known since childhood?" She whipped back toward Paige, eyes blazing. "3 weeks ago, when you claimed you needed to go to the clinic for a routine checkup, I insisted on going with you because I was worried about my future grandchildren. You thought because I'm 65, my eyesight is failing. You thought I wouldn't notice you slipping away to the specialized donor wing on the 3rd floor. You thought I wouldn't recognize the name of my own nephew in the patient consent log." With a violent flick of her wrist, Eleanor hurled the thick stack of documents straight into Paige's face. Heavy parchment sheets and glossy photos exploded into the air, raining down onto the stage and fluttering off the edges onto the front row dining tables. Several nosy guests instantly snatched up the scattered papers. Within seconds, their expressions morphed from shock to absolute morbid horror. On the very top page, printed in bold, undeniable black ink beneath the Genesis Fertility Institute letterhead, was a signed medical agreement. Consent form for in vitro fertilization, IVF, using donor material. Patient, Paige Sterling. Biological donor ID, XM, Dylan Sterling. Julian stood perfectly frozen, his expensive shoes rooted to the stage. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black as he stared at the scattered papers at his feet. A terrifying, suffocating pressure seized his throat. He tried to inhale, but his lungs felt like they were filled with wet cement. Eleanor wasn't finished. She turned her head, her eyes sweeping over the crowded lawn like a searchlight, until they locked onto a young man in a loud designer floral shirt, trying to discreetly hide behind the catering tent near the bar. "Dylan Sterling!" Eleanor screamed, her voice cutting through the rising roar of the crowd like a bullwhip. The young man instantly froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a cornered rat. He instinctively took a step back, but bumped into a table of startled neighbors from an elite gated community, nearly knocking over a silver punch bowl. Eleanor pointed a finger at him, her voice dripping with venomous disgust. "You pathetic, freeloading parasite. Don't you dare hide. That Genesis donor ID XM belongs exclusively to you. You visited that fertility clinic 7 times in the last 12 months. Every time you told your mother you were driving into the city for a consulting interview, the only job you did was filling a plastic cup so your degenerate cousin-in-law could get pregnant." The entire estate lawn descended into a deafening uproar. "Good Lord!" A prominent bank president whispered loudly from table 4. "She used sperm from his cousin?" An old socialite gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "She slept with that deadbeat Dylan to pass the kids off as Sterling heirs. That's repulsive. That is an absolute abomination." Dylan's legs buckled. He grabbed the edge of the catering table to keep from collapsing onto the grass. "Aunt Eleanor, I swear I didn't do anything. It wasn't me. It's a lie." Eleanor marched to the edge of the stage, her face twisted in fury. "You didn't do it? Then explain to this entire town why a copy of your verified driver's license is attached to the Genesis donor files right here on this table. Explain why the head nurse at the clinic instantly identified your photograph. Explain why private investigators recorded you walking through their front doors 7 times in high-definition video." Tears of pure, humiliated rage finally spilled over Eleanor's mascara-stained lashes, leaving streaks down her powdered cheeks. She looked out at the sea of horrified faces, people she had hosted at charity galas, people she had socialized with for 40 years, and her voice broke into a jagged sob of absolute defeat. "I have spent my entire life upholding the dignity, honor, and reputation of the Sterling name," Eleanor cried out, her hand trembling against her chest. "I genuinely believed that God had finally blessed my son with a legitimate heir to carry our legacy into the future. Instead, She spun around, fixing Paige with a murderous glare. This alleyway viper secretly bought the sperm of our family's degenerate, implanted someone else's embryos into her uterus, and brought these bastards into my home. She let me throw lavish parties. She let my husband set up trust funds. She let us stand here today and become the laughingstock of the entire region. Paige's psychological defenses completely collapsed. In her arms, the baby girl was screaming hysterically. Paige ignored the child entirely, her face contorting with absolute panic as she saw the circle of social death closing in around her. "No! No, it's not true!" Paige shrieked, her voice breaking as she stumbled forward, reaching out to grab Julian's suit jacket. "Julian, listen to me! Julian, please, your mother is lying. She hated me from the start. She fabricated these papers because she wants to destroy us. Julian, tell them." She tried to throw herself against his chest, but Julian reacted as if she were covered in boiling acid. With a violent, disgusted shove, he threw her backward. The movement was so aggressive and instantaneous that Paige lost her balance, slamming hard against the acrylic podium and nearly dropping the screaming infant onto the stage floor. She froze, staring at Julian with wide, terrified eyes. Julian's face was unrecognizable. The handsome, polished corporate CEO was gone. In his place stood a broken, hyperventilating madman. His skin was mottled with crimson patches of rage. His lips trembled violently as he stared at her. The sheer scale of the betrayal, the financial cost, the public humiliation, the obliteration of his masculinity, it was crushing his psyche in real time. "You lied to me?" Julian wheezed, his voice sounding like two pieces of sandpaper grinding together. He took a menacing step toward her, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were bleeding from his nails digging into his palms. "Paige, look me in the eyes and tell the truth. Is it true? Did you sleep with Dylan?" "I didn't. Julian, I swear on my life, I didn't." Paige sobbed hysterically, tears and running makeup turning her face into a grotesque mask. "Your mother bribed someone to make these papers. She wants Claire back. She's trying to set me up." "Set you up," Eleanor screamed, snatching the remaining documents off the podium and hurling them directly at Julian's chest. "Read them yourself, you blind, arrogant fool. Read the DNA probability charts. Read the internal clinic donor transfer logs. Look at the time-stamped photos of your precious wife walking into the clinic arm in arm with your cousin." Julian caught a handful of the falling sheets. His eyes frantically darted across the page. Client, Paige Sterling. Procedure. Frozen embryo transfer using donor XM, Dylan Sterling. Beneath it was a high-resolution surveillance printout showing Paige and Dylan standing at the Genesis front desk. Dylan was signing a medical consent form while Paige handed the receptionist a corporate credit card. From the guest tables, the whispers had escalated into audible, ruthless mockery. Unbelievable. The guy divorced his successful corporate wife because she couldn't give him kids, only to get cucked by his own cousin. The Sterling family name is completely dead in this region. Old Judge Sterling will never be able to show his face at the club again. He spent 6 months bragging about these twins on LinkedIn. Turns out he's just paying for Dylan's litter. Every whisper, every muffled laugh, every look of sympathetic disgust hit Julian like a physical blow to the head. His entire body began to shake violently. In his arms, the baby boy he had held so proudly just 10 minutes ago was squeezed so tightly against his ribs that the infant let out a piercing, breathless cry of pain. The stage had devolved into an absolute battlefield of screaming infants, weeping women, and paralyzed men. The grand christening celebration had officially become the most catastrophic, publicly humiliating, grotesque farce in the history of local high society. Up in my hotel room, the iPad screen captured every glorious second of the carnage. My iPhone buzzed on the glass table. A new text from Aunt Martha. "The stage is set, honey. The whole house is on fire. Time to make your entrance." I stared at the screen, picked up my coffee cup, and took one last calm sip. Then I set the mug down and stood up. Outside my window, the sun was beating down directly overhead, casting harsh, unforgiving light on the Sterling Estate Pavilion. Perfect timing. The best time to step onto the stage is when the actors have forgotten their lines. I closed my laptop, picked up a sleek black leather document briefcase containing my second set of parting gifts, grabbed the keys to my rental car, and walked out of the room. 10 minutes later, my black rental sedan pulled up to the outer perimeter of the Sterling Estate. I stepped out of the car in 5-inch Christian Louboutin heels, a custom-tailored black Givenchy business suit, and oversized designer sunglasses. I smoothly navigated my way through the crowd of shocked, whispering guests gathered near the entrance to the pavilion. Someone in the back row spotted me first. A sharp gasp cut through the whispers. "Oh my God, is that Claire?" Within 5 seconds, the entire lawn fell dead silent. Hundreds of heads turned in my direction. The stares were a chaotic mix of shock, embarrassment, morbid curiosity, and dawning comprehension. For the last 6 months, I had been the town's favorite target for mockery. The cold, barren ex-wife, rightfully discarded by the Sterling clan to secure a fertile bride. And now, at the exact moment their magnificent dynasty was being publicly exposed as a fraudulent, incestuous farce, the discarded ex-wife was walking right through their front gates looking like $1,000,000. On the stage, Julian froze. He turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto my figure as I parted the crowd. It looked as though he had been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. The manic rage in his eyes was instantly eclipsed by a massive tidal wave of profound terror and disbelief. He knew me better than anyone. He knew Claire never wasted time on casual social visits. He knew that if I was walking onto this property today, I wasn't here as a spectator. I was the executioner. I took my time walking down the center aisle. The sharp clack, clack, clack of my Louboutins against the brick patio was steady, measured, and entirely unhurried. Every step sounded like the ticking of a doomsday clock. I reached the front of the pavilion, climbed the carpeted stairs, and stepped onto the stage. I ignored the screaming infants and the hyperventilating page. I gave Eleanor a brief, polite nod of acknowledgement. "Well done, Eleanor," and then turned my full, undivided attention to Julian. He stood there, holding the crying baby boy, his skin the color of wet ash, his lips parted in stunned horror. I took off my sunglasses, sliding them into the pocket of my Givenchy blazer, and flashed him a warm, impeccably polite corporate smile. "Well, Julian?" I said, my voice projecting clearly through the microphone on the podium that Eleanor had left active. "It looks like I arrived right on time." With fluid precision, I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal-sized financial documents bound in a blue corporate cover. I placed them neatly on the center table, right next to Paige's scattered IVF records. The light breeze caught the top pages, making them flutter with a sharp, crisp rustle. The entire 300-seat guest list leaned forward in their chairs, holding their breath to see what was coming next. I took my time. I looked Julian dead in the eyes. My voice was level, professional, and loud enough to be heard in the very back row of the tent. "You always loved bragging to your high society friends that Vertex Dynamics was exclusively your corporate triumph, and that my departure wouldn't affect your operations in the slightest," I said smoothly. "So, since you gathered the entire region's elite here today to celebrate your massive success, I decided to do you a professional favor. I came here today to conduct a real-time public audit of your financial books." Julian's jaw dropped. The knuckles of the hand gripping the baby turned white. "Claire, stop this. What are you doing? This is a private family matter. Get off this stage. A private family matter?" I interrupted, my tone light and conversational, my gaze sweeping over the sea of county judges, bank presidents, and prominent investors. "Julian, 5 minutes ago you were standing on this exact stage with a microphone in your hand, desperately trying to showcase your wealth, your legacy, and your corporate superiority to everyone in this town. If you love a public audience so much, let's give them a comprehensive presentation." I leaned over, picked up the second document from my stack, and walked to the edge of the stage, handing it down to an elderly gentleman at table number 2, Mr. Smith, a retired managing partner of the region's largest accounting firm and an old acquaintance of Julian's father. "Mr. Smith," I said respectfully, "you've audited municipal and corporate accounts in this county for 40 years. As an independent professional, could you please read the highlighted figures on this balance sheet aloud for the audience?" Mr. Smith blinked in surprise. He looked at Julian, at the trembling Judge Sterling, and then adjusted his reading glasses, focusing on the document in his hands. Within 3 seconds, his professional eyebrows pulled together into a deep V. "This? Good heavens! Mr." Smith muttered into a microphone that a nosy tablemate shoved in front of his face. "This is a consolidated 90-day cash flow statement for Vertex Dynamics, along with certified copies of commercial debt obligations. In layman's terms, Mr. Smith," my voice carried over the crowd, "Julian systematically mortgaged and encumbered every unencumbered asset inside Vertex Dynamics: corporate real estate, intellectual property, server hardware, company vehicles, executive payroll, even projected accounts receivable for the next 36 months. Everything was leveraged to a predatory secondary lender at extortionate interest rates." I paused, turning back to Julian, whose knees had actually started to shake. And to maintain the illusion of solvency to secure those emergency bridge loans, he submitted a certified revenue projection based on a $5 million enterprise software contract with an overseas tech conglomerate. I raised my right hand, pointing to a separate, red-flagged document on the table. "That $5 million contract is a complete, fabricated forgery." The guest pavilion erupted into a massive wave of shocked gasps and angry shouts. "A forgery?" yelled a local venture capitalist from the 3rd row, jumping to his feet. "He told us at the country club mixer last month that the contract was signed and sealed. I was preparing to participate in his Series B funding round next week. He lied on commercial loan applications? That's federal wire fraud. The whole company is a house of cards." Julian's eyes darted wildly around the stage. Panic seized his face like a cornered beast. He lunged toward the microphone, screaming over the crowd, "She's lying. Don't listen to a word she says. She's a bitter, jealous ex-wife trying to destroy my corporate reputation. That contract is real. She doesn't have internal access to my company anymore. Why would I need internal access, Julian?" I laughed softly. The sound was cold and sharp as cracking ice. "I am the senior financial risk auditor who built the structural foundation of your company from scratch. That overseas corporate client you supposedly signed? The legal entity you listed on the loan documents was officially dissolved and liquidated by the central bank 6 months ago due to insolvency. The corporate tax ID number you printed on your forged agreement is missing 2 digits. And the digital signature stamp you used? It belongs to an offshore shell firm that went bankrupt in 2021. I took a deep breath, looking at his sweaty, pale face with absolute clinical contempt. "Julian, did you genuinely believe that the moment I walked out of your penthouse, I would simply stop monitoring the financial ecosystem I spent 5 years building?" I paced slowly across the stage, addressing the crowd as if giving a boardroom presentation. To cover his massive operational losses and maintain his lavish high society lifestyle, Julian took out fraudulent commercial loans to pay off older corporate debts, using non-existent future revenue to plug immediate liquidity holes. It was a classic illegal Ponzi structure designed to keep Vertex afloat just long enough for him to throw this celebration and trick local investors into bailing him out. I raised my left wrist, checking the time on my diamond-encrusted Cartier watch. However, I'm afraid that exit strategy is no longer viable. Exactly 30 minutes before my arrival at this estate, my legal team handed over a complete, unredacted forensic accounting audit, along with certified copies of the forged loan documents to the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, the SEC, and every major lending institution holding Vertex debt. I looked dead into Julian's eyes. "By my estimation, your corporate bank accounts, lines of credit, and merchant acquiring facilities were officially frozen by federal order approximately 12 minutes ago. Your corporate empire isn't just bankrupt, Julian. It is under active federal seizure." Julian staggered backward as if he had been punched in the chest. You're insane, he whispered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. You ruined me. You destroyed my life. I ruined you? I took a step forward, my gaze glacial and uncompromising. Julian, Vertex didn't collapse today because I pushed it. It collapsed because you ate it from the inside out like a parasite. I aggressively pointed at Paige, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the stage floor. You siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars of critical operating capital out of your startup to fund your secret affair. You bought luxury Tribeca lofts, imported sports cars, Hermes bags, first-class vacations to street, Barts and private treatments at a fertility clinic. You used the company's marketing budgets to pay off your mistress's brother's gambling debts. Did I authorize those corporate expenses? I pivoted, my eyes locking onto Dylan Sterling, who was still cowering by the catering tent, desperately trying to sneak toward the parking lot exit. And your precious cousin Dylan? You paid him a six-figure executive salary out of the engineering payroll fund while he did absolutely nothing but gamble and serve as a private sperm donor for your wife. Should I read aloud the exact amount of corporate funds you embezzled to cover Dylan's legal settlements, Julian? Would you like me to read it to your father right now? Dylan let out a pathetic whimper. His knees gave out entirely, and he collapsed onto the grass behind the bar. At the VIP table, retired Judge Sterling tried to stand up to defend his family's name, but the massive emotional and financial shock of the revelations was too much. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways out of his chair onto the brick patio. "Arthur!" Eleanor screamed in terror, abandoning Paige and sprinting off the stage to rush to her unconscious husband, while several guests yelled for someone to call 911. It was at that exact moment that the smartphone in Julian's suit pocket began to vibrate violently, frantically. His hand shook so badly he dropped the baby boy onto a padded chair on the stage as he pulled the phone from his pocket. The caller ID flashed on the screen. Elena, assistant. Running on pure blind instinct, Julian swiped to answer, accidentally activating the speakerphone when his finger slipped across the glass. Before he could utter a single syllable, Elena's hysterical, panicked voice exploded from the phone speaker, projecting clearly into the stage microphone and broadcasting across the entire estate. "Mr. Sterling, thank God you answered. It's an absolute disaster!" Elena screamed, her breathing ragged as if she was running down a hallway. "Federal agents just raided the Manhattan headquarters. We have FBI financial crimes investigators and SEC operatives taping up the executive offices. They're confiscating all the servers and corporate hard drives. They served a federal warrant for commercial bank fraud and wire fraud." Julian's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Elena's hysterical shouting continued to pour from the phone. "And that's not all. The commercial banks just called our finance department. All our operating accounts are completely frozen. Our payroll bounced. And 5 minutes ago, we received an official cease and desist order from the legal counsel representing Dr. Arthur Bennett." Julian's eyes widened in confusion. Dr. Bennett?" He managed to croak into the receiver. "Yes, Dr. Bennett, Claire's former academic advisor. He officially revoked our core proprietary licensing agreement as of noon today. He stated that because our firm violated the terms of the original intellectual property transfer by engaging in fraudulent accounting, the foundational algorithmic patents for all of Vertex's software are legally voided and revert back to him. Our core product line is officially dead. We have nothing left to sell." Elena broke into audible, hyperventilating sobs over the speakerphone. "Institutional investors are calling the office, threatening to sue you personally. The engineering team is walking out. Mr. Sterling, you have to get back to Manhattan immediately. If you don't return, they are going to issue a federal warrant for your arrest. Vertex is done. We are completely dead." Click. The line went dead. Julian's hand went limp. The expensive iPhone slipped through his fingers, hitting the wooden floor of the stage with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. A suffocating graveyard silence settled over the entire Sterling estate. 5 minutes ago, This lawn was the site of the most extravagant, celebratory baby presentation in Connecticut history. Now, it looked like the aftermath of a military airstrike. The only sounds remaining were the cries of the infant twins sitting on the stage chairs, the distant wail of approaching ambulance sirens for Judge Sterling, and the heavy, ragged breathing of 200 high society guests staring at Julian with absolute, horrified disgust. The man who stood on that stage 10 minutes ago bragging about his brilliant corporate mind, boasting of his flawless family pedigree, and flaunting his status as the absolute winner of life had been entirely eradicated. His company was seized by federal agents. His financial assets were frozen. His father was having a heart attack on the patio, and the twin heirs he had paraded before the world for 6 months were the biological offspring of his deadbeat cousin. He had fallen from the absolute pinnacle of high society arrogance into the deepest, most humiliating pit of personal and professional destruction in 15 minutes flat. On the floor of the stage, Paige had completely lost her grip on reality. Her hair had come loose from its elegant chignon, hanging in greasy, sweat-soaked strands across her face as she crawled on her knees toward Julian, clutching at his suit trousers. Julian, say something!" she screamed, her voice breaking into a desperate shriek. "Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them your assistant is lying. You're a CEO. You have millions. We have kids. Julian, do something." I looked down at her pathetic, scrambling figure and let out a quiet, dismissive sigh. I reached into my leather briefcase one last time and pulled out a final sheet of paper. It was an official, notarized stock transfer certificate. I held the document up high, angling it, so the bright sun illuminated the bold, black legal text and official corporate seals for the entire front row to see. "I almost forgot to mention one last administrative detail, Julian," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Paige's hysterical crying. "That 15% stake in Vertex Dynamics that I agreed to take off your hands in our property division settlement, I completed the final sale of those shares yesterday afternoon." Julian slowly raised his head. His eyes were empty and unseeing as he stared at the document in my hand. "I sold them cheap," I continued, a cold, triumphant smile touching my lips. "A modest $15 million in cash. But the primary buyer wasn't a friendly angel investor or a venture capital fund. It was Vanguard Corporate Restructuring, a predatory hostile liquidation fund, famous for dismantling bankrupt tech assets." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink into his shattered brain. Their absolute, non-negotiable precondition for closing the deal was that upon acquiring the shares, they would immediately initiate aggressive corporate liquidation and dissolution proceedings against Vertex to recover their capital by auctioning off your remaining hardware and office leases. I lowered the paper, staring directly into Julian's bloodshot, defeated eyes. "That means that as of 8 a.m. this morning, Vertex Dynamics is no longer a Sterling family enterprise. It is entirely owned by a Wall Street liquidation firm. You don't even have a chair at your desk anymore, Julian." Julian stood completely paralyzed. The remaining blood in his body seemed to drain into his feet, leaving him looking like a wax statue of a man. His lips parted, his jaw trembling violently as his brain finally pieced together the entire timeline of my actions over the last 2 weeks. "You," he whispered, his voice so weak the microphone barely caught it. "You planned all of this from the very beginning?" "Yes," I admitted cleanly and proudly, without a trace of modesty. "I began mapping out this exact sequence of events the very night I confirmed you took Paige to that downtown hotel. The moment you decided to betray my 5 years of loyalty, kick me out of my own company, and use my hard-earned corporate capital to fund your lavish new lifestyle with my best friend, your destruction was a foregone conclusion." I stepped closer to him. My voice dropped to a low, icy tone that carried absolute, uncompromising authority. "You thought you could step on my neck to build your dream life. You thought I was just some quiet spreadsheet you could throw away when you wanted an upgrade. I told you before, Julian. I manage corporate risk for a living. When an asset becomes toxic, I don't just dump it. I completely neutralize it. From the guest tables, The initial shock had finally boiled over into open, aggressive hostility. "You absolute scumbag!" shouted a former state senator from the first table, pointing his cane at Julian. "You lied to federal banks. You stole from your own startup. And you dragged this disgusting, incestuous freak show into your father's house. Judge Sterling spent 50 years building an immaculate reputation on the bench, and you destroyed it in 10 minutes for a cheating gold digger. Call the police. Don't let him leave the county. He's a federal fugitive. Get out of our town. You make us sick." The crowd was now surging around the pavilion, physically blocking the exits to prevent Julian or Dylan from escaping before local law enforcement arrived. Down on the patio, paramedics were pushing their way through the crowd with a stretcher, loading the unconscious Judge Sterling onto a gurney while Eleanor walked beside him, sobbing hysterically, her royal blue suit stained with spilled coffee and tears. As she passed the stage, Eleanor stopped for a second. She turned her head, looking up at Julian, her golden boy, her illustrious heir, the CEO with an expression of such profound, soul-crushing disgust and disappointment that it looked as if she were staring at a dead stranger. She didn't say a word. She just turned her back on him and followed the paramedics to the ambulance. Julian was left standing completely alone in the center of the stage, surrounded by weeping women, screaming infants, and 300 screaming members of the elite demanding his arrest. He had nothing left to say. No eloquent corporate speech could explain away federal bank fraud warrants. No high society PR spin could erase IVF donor records from Genesis linking his wife to his cousin. He was entirely, irrevocably stripped of his wealth, his status, his family, and his dignity. I looked at his trembling, pathetic silhouette one last time. Suddenly, a wave of profound indifference washed over me. The debt was paid. The ledger was completely balanced. Spending even one more second on that stage felt like a waste of my precious time. I placed the stock transfer certificate back into my Givenchy leather briefcase, zipped it shut, and turned my back to him to walk down the stage steps. "Claire," Julian's voice tore from his throat, a jagged, agonizing scream of purest despair. I stopped at the edge of the stage, but I didn't turn around. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of his shoes against the wood as he threw himself forward, collapsing onto his knees just a few feet behind me. His breathing was heavy, ragged, and wet with sudden, hysterical tears. "Did you?" he wheezed, every word trembling with excruciating pain. "Did you ever, even for a single second, truly love me?" I stood perfectly still for 2 seconds. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Not a corporate smirk, but a smile of absolute, liberated clarity. I turned my head slightly, looking over my shoulder at the kneeling, broken man who was once my husband. The handsome, ambitious young entrepreneur who had once held my hand in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn and promised me the world was completely dead and buried. In his place was a pathetic, criminal fraudster, kneeling in the ruins of his own arrogance. "Of course I loved you, Julian," I said softly, my voice calm and crystal clear. "I loved you enough to take my life savings and my youth to build an empire for you from scratch when you didn't have a dime to your name." My smile faded. My eyes grew hard and cold as cut diamonds. "But you took my loyalty and my heart and threw them in the dirt. So now, you get to live in the dirt. This entire catastrophe isn't bad luck, Julian. It's simply the final settlement of your account." Without waiting for his response, I turned my head forward, gripped my leather briefcase, and walked down the pavilion steps. My 5-inch Louboutins clicked steadily against the brick patio as I parted the crowd of shouting, chaotic guests. Behind me, the stage was a symphony of absolute destruction. Paige was screaming hysterically as police cruisers pulled onto the lawn. Dylan was being dragged out from behind the bar by private security. Julian was sobbing uncontrollably on his knees, and the piercing wails of 2 infants who belonged to neither of them cut through the air. I didn't look back once. Not a single glance. Because as of 11:30 a.m. on that brilliant Sunday morning, absolutely none of that was my business anymore. By the time I reached the outer brick gates of the Sterling estate, the morning heat was rising, but the breeze blowing off the river felt exceptionally crisp and clean. The weeping willows lining the street swayed gently in the wind, completely indifferent to the high society apocalypse unfolding 3 blocks away. Just as I reached my black rental sedan, I heard familiar footsteps hurrying down the sidewalk behind me. "Claire! Sweetheart, wait!" I turned around to see Aunt Martha jogging toward me, out of breath. Her Sunday hat was sitting slightly askew on her head. Her face was flushed with excitement, her eyes shining with tears of fierce pride and satisfaction. In her hands, she clutched a large stainless steel thermos. "Aunt Martha?" I smiled, stepping forward to take her hands. "Oh, my brave, beautiful girl," Martha panted, pulling me into a fierce, crushing hug that smelled of lavender and vanilla. She held me tight for several long seconds before pulling back, wiping a tear from her wrinkled cheek. "You went through all that hell, all that betrayal and heartbreak, and you didn't breathe a word to your old aunt until this week. Why did you carry all that weight alone, honey?" I smiled softly, tapping the leather briefcase under my arm. "Because in my line of work, Aunt Martha, you never press charges until the audit is complete and the board is in checkmate." Martha let out a loud, booming laugh, slapping her knee. "Well, you certainly audited the hell out of them today, sweetheart. I haven't seen anything like that in 30 years at the courthouse." Old Eleanor looked like she swallowed a bucket of nails. "And Julian? Lord, that boy is going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit before the end of the month." She shoved the heavy thermos into my hands. "Here, I made this fresh this morning before all the madness started. It's my signature sweet peach iced tea with fresh mint. Take it for the drive to the airport. It'll cool you down." I unscrewed the cap of the thermos. The sweet, icy aroma of fresh peaches and mint drifted up, instantly clearing the last remnants of the estate's toxicity from my lungs. I took a long, refreshing gulp. It was the best thing I had tasted in 5 years. "It's never too late, sweetheart," Martha said softly, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. Her eyes were warm and maternally intense. "You're young, you're brilliant, and you have the whole world in the palm of your hand. Go back to your city and live for yourself now. Don't ever look back at this swamp again." I nodded firmly, my smile reaching my eyes. "I won't, Aunt Martha. I promise. No more looking back." That afternoon, I drove the rental car back down the interstate toward JFK International Airport. Above me, the sky was transforming into a breathtaking canvas of deep orange, purple, and gold, like a massive fire burning away old corporate records and turning my past into harmless ash. What awaited Julian Sterling upon his return to the city was only the tip of the iceberg. By Monday morning, financial and legal news feeds across the country exploded. Exclusive. Wall Street Journal Vertex Dynamics seized in federal bank fraud raid. Founder Julian Sterling ousted as CEO. Bloomberg fall of a tech star. SEC investigates multi-million-dollar commercial loan forgeries at Vertex. New York Post historic Connecticut family in shock as high society baby presentation ends in scandal and paternity brawl. The internet feeds moved at blinding speed. Financial journalists and legal commentators descended on the corpse of Vertex Dynamics like sharks smelling blood in the water. The Sterling family, who had spent decades obsessing over their flawless aristocratic reputation, was completely paralyzed. Eleanor and the recovering Judge Sterling barricaded themselves in their Greenwich estate, refusing to answer calls from reporters or old friends, unable to show their faces in the region. As for Paige, her true survivor nature revealed itself with breathtaking speed. 3 days after the explosion at the estate, I received a secure digital message from the private investigator I had retained in New York. It contained a single surveillance photo and a brief banking summary. In the photo taken at 2 a.m. in the underground parking garage of the luxury Tribeca apartment complex Julian had bought her, Paige was dressed entirely in black athletic wear. Her face was hidden by a baseball cap and a heavy respirator mask. She was frantically shoving 3 massive, overstuffed Louis Vuitton suitcases into the trunk of a beat-up sedan. She wasn't alone. Standing right next to her, nervously checking the garage entrance, was Dylan Sterling. Their operational pivot was ruthless and immediate. The investigator's summary listed the details. Asset tracking update. Over the last 48 hours, Paige Sterling utilized joint banking credentials and power of attorney to systematically liquidate $450,000 from Julian Sterling's personal emergency savings accounts and money market funds. She emptied the contents of his personal safe deposit box, withdrawing approximately $200,000 in jewelry, gold coins, and bearer bonds. All funds were successfully routed through offshore crypto exchanges and deposited into an untraceable account registered in the Cayman Islands under a Dylan Sterling LLC. Subjects vacated the premises at 02:15 hours and are currently en route to a non-extradition jurisdiction in the Caribbean. I stared at the surveillance photo on my laptop screen, closed the lid, and let out a quiet, genuine laugh. Perfect. When wild dogs are deprived of meat, they inevitably turn and tear each other to pieces. Now that was a truly satisfying return on investment. 2 days later, Julian finally called my personal cell phone. The call wasn't from his corporate iPhone or his executive assistant's number. He had managed to borrow a prepaid burner phone, probably from the front desk of a cheap airport motel. When I swiped the screen to answer, the line was dead silent for several seconds. There was no background music, no corporate confidence, just the heavy, ragged breathing of a man hyperventilating into the receiver. After about 15 seconds, his voice finally broke through. It was so hoarse, weak, and devastated that it sounded like an 80-year-old man. Claire. I didn't say hello. I simply made a neutral, acknowledging sound in my throat. Paige ran away. Those 3 words spilled from his mouth with a pathetic, absurd comedy that was almost painful to listen to. He had finally been forced to confront the objective, mathematical truth. The pure, traditional, loving woman he had placed on a pedestal and sacrificed his marriage for was, at her core, a ruthless financial predator who had used him as a bridge loan to gain liquidity. I stood by the panoramic windows of my Manhattan penthouse, swirling a glass of expensive Napa Valley Cabernet, looking out at the glittering cityscape. My voice was entirely flat, conveying the detachment of an actuary reading a weather report. I know. And I presume she took every liquid asset that wasn't bolted to the floor. Julian's breath hitched into a violent, shuddering sob over the line. She took everything, Claire. She emptied my personal checking accounts. She drained my money market funds. She took my grandmother's diamond rings out of the safe deposit box. Even the college trust fund capital I set aside for the kids. She cleaned it all out and fled with Dylan. Dylan's phone is disconnected. My parents, my father, won't even speak to me. He changed the security codes on the estate gates. My own mother told the gate guards to call the police if I stepped foot on the property. He fell silent for a long, agonizing minute. I could hear him weeping uncontrollably into the cheap plastic burner phone. The sound of his absolute, total ruin echoed through the digital static. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible, drenched in a crushing, belated realization. You knew, didn't you? You knew she was going to rob me. You knew those kids weren't mine from the very beginning. Yes. Julian. I knew, I replied calmly, taking a slow sip of wine. I had the complete forensic dossier. Before I even handed you the divorce papers. Then why didn't you tell me? He suddenly screamed, a short, hysterical flare of his old arrogance surfacing before collapsing back into despair. If you knew she was a fraud who was sleeping with Dylan, why didn't you warn me? Why did you let me walk out onto that stage and destroy my entire life? Why was it my legal obligation to warn you, Julian? I countered, my voice dropping an octave into an icy, razor-sharp register. That was your own strategic corporate decision. You made the active choice to betray our marriage, kick me out of the company I saved, and install your mistress in my place. You constantly lectured me about how Paige was sweet, innocent, and the only woman capable of giving you a loving home. Well, if she just robbed your bank accounts and fled to the Caymans with your cousin, doesn't that simply mean your executive judgment was fundamentally flawed? Claire, please, Julian cried out, his voice breaking from total, absolute despair. Don't talk to me like an auditor. What am I supposed to do now? I have massive federal fraud charges hanging over my head. Vanguard is liquidating my office furniture. I'm living in a 2-star motel by JFK with $50 in my pocket. Please, show some mercy. What kind of mercy are you looking for, Julian? I asked coldly. Would you like me to draft an office memo expressing my corporate sympathy? Or would you prefer I send you a congratulatory card for your well-deserved bankruptcy? He choked on his tears, unable to formulate a coherent argument. After a long silence, his voice dropped to a pathetic, begging tone, a drowning man grasping at a razor blade. I'm sorry, Claire. God, I'm so sorry about everything, he wept. My company is gone. The kids aren't mine. The woman I sacrificed my reputation for was a criminal who played me from day one. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. Claire, please, let me come back to you. Let's start over. If you take me back, I'll sign over all my future earnings to you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll be the supportive partner you always wanted. Please, Claire, I'm begging you. I closed my eyes for a second, taking another sip of my Cabernet. Listening to his pathetic pleas, I felt an overwhelming sense of pure boredom. It was so astoundingly predictable. This is the fundamental architecture of a narcissistic man. When his corporate valuations are soaring and his life is smooth, he treats your loyalty as a stepping stone to trample on. But the very second his fraudulent empire collapses and he falls into the mud, he desperately tries to turn you into his personal life raft. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He wasn't sorry for breaking his vows or lying to my face for a year. He was only sorry he had lost the one hyper-competent, loyal woman who was always willing to clean up his financial messes and keep him solvent. I waited patiently in silence until his sobs subsided into ragged gasps. Then, I leaned closer to the receiver. My voice was crystal clear, entirely devoid of anger, pity, or hesitation. Julian, I said smoothly, you made a critical error in your risk assessment model. I am not your contingency plan. I am not your bridge loan. And I will never be your life raft again. His breath hitched sharply. Claire, please. Never attempt to contact this number or my corporate office ever again, I interrupted, my tone carrying absolute, final legal authority. Whatever federal charges, financial judgments, or personal misery befall you in the next 10 years, that is the direct, measurable return on the investments you made. They belong entirely to you. Our partnership is permanently terminated. Without waiting for a single word in response, I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the end call button, and immediately registered the burner number to my permanent block list. Outside my penthouse windows, the deep blue dusk of Manhattan had fully descended, and the city lights burned with intense electrical brilliance across Midtown. I poured myself a little more rich red Cabernet, settling comfortably into the plush leather of my sofa. The screen of my iPhone lit up silently on the glass coffee table. It was an audio message from Aunt Martha in Connecticut. I pressed play. Aunt Martha's voice filled the room, brimming with cheerful satisfaction. Well, sweetheart, just wanted to give you the latest local news. Julian actually took a Greyhound bus back up to Greenwich this afternoon and tried to get onto the estate to beg his daddy for bail money. He was on his knees on the brick driveway, bawling his eyes out. But old Judge Sterling ordered the groundskeepers to keep the iron gates padlocked shut. Wouldn't even bring him out a glass of water. Eleanor stood on the second-floor balcony and screamed down that she no longer had a son. Now the whole town is avoiding him like he's got the plague. He walked back down the highway with his head between his knees. Absolute justice. Darling. I listened to the message all the way to the end, smiled, and pressed delete. Then, I opened my professional leather planner. Next Monday at 9 a.m., I had a high-level valuation meeting scheduled with the managing partners of a premier Silicon Valley venture fund, evaluating a $40 million lead investment into a revolutionary AI cybersecurity firm. Next month, I was flying to Zurich to deliver the keynote address at an international M&A summit for female executives. My professional and personal horizon was wide open, stretching out before me with endless, brilliant possibilities. I had decades of youth, massive capital resources, and complete personal autonomy to build a life more magnificent, independent, and fulfilling than anything I had ever experienced in the past. As for Julian Sterling, he was no longer even a notable corporate failure in my professional portfolio. He was simply an expired, fully amortized bad debt write-off from a fiscal year that was already closed, audited, and archived. I raised my crystal glass of Cabernet to the glittering Manhattan skyline, watching the dark ruby liquid catch the ambient light of the city. It felt like a silent, well-earned toast to liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was finally living exclusively, unapologetically, and magnificently for myself.